Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be guiding you through the various different background subtraction, background correction, background removal, whatever you may call it, settings and techniques that we have within our Phoretix 1D software. Now, Phoretix 1D has a number of unique background removal techniques and abilities that are not shared by our competitors that really set us apart in this area, and I've chosen this demo image very specifically to be able to showcase and highlight why you would need those, when you would need those, and what the benefit of having those at your disposal are. Now, if you'd like a free trial of our Phoretix 1D software to test in your lab with your own images, please check out the link in the description below, or if you want any more information on Phoretix 1D, again, the link to our main product web page is going to be down there as well. So, as I mentioned, I picked this image very specifically because there are quite a few things wrong with it that we can use the unique tools within Phoretix 1D to accommodate for, to ensure that you can still get good quality data even out of poor quality images. Upon loading this image, you can immediately see that something is a bit off. If I look at the 3D view here, you can see in fact that the data actually appears to be bulging almost. But what we can see is that obviously we need to invert this image because we're getting troughs instead of peaks. So upon inversion, you can immediately see what's happened here. There's some kind of lens effect whereby the background is much brighter at the four corners and the edges of this image than in the center. What that means for me as an analyst is whatever background removal techniques I use for the lanes on the left-hand side are going to be very different in terms of strength and even possibly technique from those that I need to use in the center. And then on the right-hand side, those are going to be different. I'm going to need different parameters again. The majority of software working in this space to analyze and quantify, sds-page, gel, electrophoresis images, and Western blot images only allow you to apply a singular kind of method of background subtraction and a singular strength across your whole image. But there is no one size fits all for an image like this. So either you have to repeat your experiment, which may not be possible if you've used the last of your sample, if it was a particularly expensive or rare sample, or if you simply don't have access to the equipment anymore. What are you going to be able to do in these circumstances? Or what if your equipment has had a malfunction, and you don't have access to it anymore, you need to replace it, or do you need to replace it? Well, with the correct software, you can still get good quality data out of an image such as this. So that's where Phoretix 1D really shines. It can still get you good quality, quantifiable, reproducible data, even in less than perfect circumstances such as this. It can give you good output, even with poor input, is another way of saying it. So how am I going to possibly quantify these bands, given that this background is so variable across my image? I'll just drop some lanes on so I can get through to the background section. I'm aware that these lanes aren't perfect, but this is a video about background subtraction, not, lane definition, which I will do one on at some point. So you see here, I've come through to the background selection stage, and if I just bring up lane 1 and lane 7, you can see that as we move through the profile, we can see that represented on the left-hand side by this blue line in our image. And the way that Phoretix handles lanes when you've got multiple lane profiles selected is my cursor is at the same point on both these lanes. But you can see very clearly that the background over here is much different to the back in lane 1. It's very different to the background that's in lane 7. And this is going to be even further highlighted as I roll through the various different background correction options that I've got. So the first background correction method that we've got obviously is none. You may prefer not to use background subtraction. That's on you. In which case all of your results will come out as raw data. Even with background correction, you can ask Phoretix to output raw data for, Excel or PDF reporting, but you may just want to work with the raw data all the way through, no background correction at all. The next setting that we've got is rolling ball, which is an adaptive background subtraction method. And when I say adaptive, I mean it changes how much background it's removing as it moves along the lane length. So that's kind of the industry standard now. It's very good in the majority of scenarios. You can see here that it's done a pretty good job just with the default settings straight off the bat on lane 1. Lane 2, however, it's not done as great a job. We can change the parameters, the strength of the background subtraction that we use by changing this radius lane percentage, and I do this by left clicking on it and moving my mouse left and right. So you can see in kind of the live view how that changes, what we're going to be subtracting, what we're going to be considering background. And when we click on show corrected, that's subtracted, and you can see what bands are going to be quantified with the current settings applied. Now, within the Phoretix 1D software, we represent the diameter of the rolling ball as a percentage of the lane length. And I'm not going to go into the academics of rolling ball background subtraction. There's more information on it in the manual that comes with the software. And there's lots of information out there about it. It's a very well-established technique for image analysis. We used to, if you're coming from our older Clicks, TL100, that kind of software, you may be used to this technique being displayed in pixels. So this radius, it describes the radius of the ball that we're rolling underneath our peak. Bigger numbers, bigger ball, smaller numbers, smaller ball. We used to use pixel value when lanes were much smaller. So when I say smaller, I mean smaller in terms of pixels. With the advent of longer lanes and higher resolution images, we reached a point technologically where defining it at the pixel level, you had to make huge changes in pixel level to be able to see any noticeable change in pixel radius, to notice any actual change in your background subtraction kind of removal. What that meant for the user was it wasn't a great UI choice to be able to have to change numbers by thousands to be able to see even a very small change. So we came up with a way of doing it as a percentage of the lane length, which meant that this is much more adaptive and capable of handling very short lanes, but also very long lanes, very low resolution lanes, and very high resolution lanes. So because Phoretix 1D is vendor neutral software, it has to be able to cope with a lot of different scenarios in terms of capture settings, and that's why we've done that. So we now represent it as a radius lane length, and this provides a much greater user experience for when they're adjusting these settings. The next background removal technique we have is rubber band. This is somewhat adaptive, whereby it kind of just draws a rubber band from underneath all of the peaks and connects them together. It's not super useful in circumstances such as this. You can see it's kind of just joined the end of the profile to the other end of the profile and left all of this huge amount of background in. Again, this image is not the best for background removal techniques, and it's why I'm going to show off the advanced features of Phoretix 1D to you in a little bit, how we correct that. Constant value does exactly what it says on the tin. It is just a blanket constant background removal technique. As I explained earlier in the video, the reason this won't work is because it relies on there being a consistent background value throughout your image, which is not the case. It's very rarely the case in any image, to be honest, but certainly in this image, we know for sure that there is not an even background value that's going to kind of spread evenly across this image. So you can see here, as I've selected this value here, that's a fine background subtraction value for this lane, but if I apply it to this lane, it's going to cut off huge amounts of my data and make this band, when quantified, much smaller than it actually is in its true value. So the way to use the constant value is you can either type the value that you want directly into this box, or left click and move your mouse left and right again to be able to adjust that, or left click somewhere in your lane profile to automatically set the constant value to the value of the pixel that you clicked on. Profile minimum is exactly the same as constant value. It has exactly the same caveats in its usage as constant value. However, software will automatically detect the minimum profile value, well, the minimum value for every profile, every lane, and set that as the background subtraction value. So it is just an easier way of selecting your minimum value per lane, setting that as your constant value all in one. Image rectangle is a very old school way of doing this. Now, a lot of software still relies on image rectangle. We include image rectangle to accommodate users that may still be using this technique. It's typically used whereby in the experimental procedure, a user has left a lane or multiple lanes of their gel blank. The idea being that you can get this rectangle that we've got highlighted in purple here and spread it out across your blank lane, if I imagine this lane is blank, and then use that blank lane as your background value. The thought process being this blank lane has been through all of the kind of imaging and experimental procedures that everything else has, but without any sample in it, therefore it should be background, right? It should be empty, it's considered empty. What's actually going on behind the scenes here is when I've drawn my image rectangle, we average all of the grayscale values, all the pixel values from within this square, and then set that average value as a constant value. So it's just a different way of getting to a constant value. Again, all the caveats with constant values still apply. It's a very heavy-handed technique. It doesn't work when you've got uneven background in images such as this. So yeah, all of those caveats still apply, but it's a different way of getting there, and some people still like to work like this, especially with kind of Western blots and things like that. We've got lane edge background subtraction, which is mainly designed for very busy lanes, somewhat like this, whereby you've got lots of bands that kind of spread into each other with high signal, and there's no real definition of where you would kind of say there is background. There's no real gap in DNA, RNA, protein. You might have lots of proteins that are all very similar size, so they all kind of bleed into each other. In situations such as this, it's very hard to get a background from within the lane profile. So by using lane edge, what we actually do is look outside the lane box, look at the pixels along the edge of the outside of the lane box, and use the average value there as the background subtraction technique. So you can see that it is somewhat adaptive, but also it is somewhat niche in its usage. So it's typically only to be used. This is a good example because it's quite a busy lane, but it would be even more densely populated lanes than this. It would be really useful to be able to get accurate background subtraction. And of course, we do have the option to kind of influence that with the smoothing radius, again, based on lane percentage, to how we want to adjust that. And you can see all that adjusting in real time. Now, we've also got manual background subtraction, which will allow you to manually define each point of your background subtraction, which can be used to accommodate for very uneven background images like this one. So I'm just going to guide you through how we use that one. We simply left click to add a node, and we can join these up to very accurately define where our peaks and our bands are and what we want to measure. Now, a word of caution, this obviously will allow you to influence your own results. It should be used sparingly and with great caution. But yeah, you're able to really manually tune where you want your background subtraction to be. If I right click, I can remove a node, and I can always edit a node after I've placed it down. And if I want to be really accurate with it, I can zoom all the way in. So if I zoom in all the way here, I can get really accurate with where I want to put these nodes, and then zoom back out again to see how that affects my background subtraction. One word of, I guess, warning with this method is that it only applies to the lane that you're working on, because obviously if I try and apply this manual background subtraction profile to another lane, you can see it is quite far out. Because of the difference in background on these lanes, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. It is going to have to be on a lane-by-lane basis. So that brings me to lane-based background subtraction versus image-based background subtraction. So, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the vast majority of our competitors only allow you to select background subtraction strength and techniques on a per image basis. That's not going to work, and I've been through that. That's not going to work for this image because the background is so uneven. We need to be able to fine-tune our background detection settings for each lane to make sure that we're still only observing true results, true protein bands, true data, and not including any background in our data. Phoretix 1D allows you to select both the technique and the strength of that technique on a lane-by-lane basis. And in fact, if I was working with a multi-channel technique, with a multi-channel image, we also facilitate the ability to have different background correction parameters and techniques on a channel per channel basis. So if you have, a channel of your image that has higher non-specific binding than another channel, you can accommodate for that. You can still get good data out by using our software. So if I've got 3 different lanes going on here. If I have this setting on here, apply changes to all, the background subtraction technique and setting that I'm using will apply to all of my lanes all at once. But if I only change it to active, if I just come back to my lane 5, if I change this to something very obvious, if I set the constant value very low, and I turn on my other lanes, you can see that they've still got the previous settings of a rolling ball applied to them. So what I can do here is I can grab lane 1, lane 7, lane 15. I can come up with background settings that are going to work for all of these. So I can see that the rest of them are fine. It's just kind of lane 5 that I need to sort out here. So if I just bring lane 5 on, set this, let's just roughly go rolling ball. Let's go back to my overview. You can see that now I've got background subtraction techniques that are going to give me good, reliable results for all of my lanes. So I don't have to repeat my experiment, don't have to buy a new piece of equipment. I don't have to change, anything about how this was done if I've only got access to the data. Still get high quality results out because of the tools that I've got access to in Phoretix 1D. I hope this video was helpful. I hope it's going to allow people to be able to get good quality data out of poor quality images. If you've got any questions, please let me know in the comments. If there's anything else you want to see in these demo videos, please let me know.